I have one question for you. What is the price of a father's love? For me, it was exactly $146. 800 and my retirement savings. And what did I get in return? A cold smile and 4 words that changed everything. Only special people were invited. This isn't a story about sadness. This is a story about what happens when a human ATM finally closes for business. If you believe that respect is earned, not bought, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on, because you're about to witness a masterclass in self-respect. The afternoon light, the kind that's thick and golden and seems to move as slowly as honey, spilled across the hardwood floor of my bedroom. It was quiet. It's a specific kind of quiet that fills a house built for a family of 4, but now holds only 1. For the last 5 years since Eleanor passed, I'd learned to live with it, to let the silence be a companion. But today, the silence felt different. It wasn't empty, it was full of anticipation, like the held breath before a symphony begins. I stood before the full-length mirror attached to the closet door, the one Eleanor had insisted we buy. A man needs to see himself properly, she'd said. I was turning slightly, first to the left, then to the right, critically examining my reflection. The navy blue suit was, without a doubt, perfect. It was an indulgence, costing a solid $800 from a tailor downtown, far more than I'd spent on myself in the last decade combined. But the moment the fine wool touched my fingertips, I knew it was the one. It wasn't just a suit, it was a statement of pride, of occasion, of fatherhood. The fabric felt substantial. The cut was classic. And it hung on my 69-year-old frame in a way that made me feel solid. It straightened my posture, broadened my shoulders just enough to fight back against the gentle stoop of age. This, I thought, was the armor a father wears to his only son's wedding. A quiet smile tugged at my lips as I smoothed down the silk tie, a silver gray that shimmered in the afternoon light. I could already see the whole day in my mind's eye, the proud, firm clap on Ethan's shoulder, the brief, tight hug, the words I'd say to him, quiet and low, just between us. I imagined Eleanor, a phantom presence at my side, her hand tucked into the crook of my arm. She would have fussed over my tie, told me I looked impossibly handsome, and then her eyes would have found our son, and they would have filled with that fierce, brilliant light of a mother's love. My gaze drifted from the mirror to a silver frame on my dresser. It was a photo from a vacation in Florida, nearly 20 years ago. Eleanor, radiant in a sundress. Me, younger and heavier. And Ethan, a gangly teenager, with a goofy, metal-filled grin and sun-bleached hair. My life's work had been to ensure that boy's happiness. After Eleanor was gone, that mission went into overdrive. It was the only way I knew how to fill the cavernous void she left behind for both of us. So when he and his fiancée, Jessica, announced 3 years ago that they wanted to move into a trendy downtown loft they couldn't possibly afford, I didn't blink. I remembered the first time I saw it. The walls were bare, the floors were dusty, and our voices echoed in the cavernous space. They spun in circles, arms outstretched, painting a picture for me of the life they would build here, a life I knew I would be bankrolling. My phone would ping on the first of every month with the same notification from my bank payment sent, $4. Woo-bay. I never questioned it. A few weeks later, Jessica called, her voice a practiced melody of distress. Murray, the place just feels so empty. It doesn't feel like a home. So I took them furniture shopping. I stood by patiently as Jessica pointed to the plushest sectional sofa, the imported Italian marble coffee table, the king-sized bed with a headboard that cost more than my first car. Ethan just nodded along, a passive shadow to her decisive taste. I remember the feeling of my credit card sliding through the machine, again and again, and the thick stack of receipts I folded into my pocket. It didn't stop there. I recalled, with a clarity that now felt painful, a long, sweltering Saturday I spent on my hands and knees, wrestling with a ridiculously complicated IKEA bookshelf. The tiny Allen key dug into my palm. The diagrams seemed to be in a language from another planet. Through it all, I could hear them in the living room, laughing at some video on their phones. On my way out that evening, my back aching, I stopped at the Costco down the street. I pushed a flatbed cart through the aisles, loading it with flats of bottled water, organic chicken, frozen pizzas, and giant bags of coffee, stocking their stainless steel fridge and custom-built pantry because, as Jessica would often say with a breezy laugh, they were just so swamped at work, they never had time for errands. All told, when I finally sat down with my bank statements one night, the number stared back at me in cold. Ha digits, ibas man. Babe. It was a significant chunk of my retirement. The money Eleanor and I had carefully saved for traveling, for enjoying our golden years. It was gone, poured into their rent, their furniture, their groceries, their lives. But I pushed the thought away, because that's what a father does. You provide. You sacrifice. You build a foundation for your children so they can soar. That's love. I told myself, stamping down the quiet unease, that's my duty. Snapping back to the present, to the golden light and the perfect suit, I gave my reflection one last approving nod. The past was the past. Today was about the future. Their future, everything was in place. I'd had the entire house professionally cleaned so it would be immaculate for their visit. A case of the expensive champagne Ethan favored was chilling in the refrigerator, and on my mahogany desk, a crisp, white envelope lay waiting. Inside was a check for $5,000. My wedding gift. All that was left was to confirm the final details. Feeling lighter than I had in weeks, I pulled my phone from my slacks pocket and dialed Ethan's number. It rang 3 times, each chime echoing slightly in the quiet house. Before he answered, "Hey, Dad?" His voice was thin, hesitant. There was a strange tension in it, a frayed edge I couldn't quite place. "Hey, son," I boomed, my own voice, full of warmth and paternal pride. "Just calling to double-check the time for Saturday's ceremony. Want to make sure I get there early. Your mother, well, your mother would have been so proud of you. You know." A heavy pause stretched across the line. It was long enough for me to feel a prickle of concern. I could hear muffled sounds in the background. A sharp, sibilant whisper. Yeah. Dad," he finally stammered. "About that?" Before he could string another word together, the energy on the line shifted. A new voice, sharp and saccharine, took over. It was Jessica. "Oh, Murray, you're so thoughtful, but there's been a little change of plans." She never called me Dad. Not once in the 5 years I'd known her. It was always Murray. A small thing, but it was a constant reminder of the distance she maintained, a boundary I was never allowed to cross. A knot of confusion tightened in my stomach. A change of plans. Is everything okay? Nobody's sick? Are they? Oh no. Everything's absolutely perfect. She chirped, and the cheerfulness in her voice was so false, so brittle. It was like glass. I could practically see her, lounging on the sofa I'd paid for, phone pressed to her ear, a smug little smile playing on her lips. I pictured Ethan beside her, deflated, having ceded control, as he always did. We actually got married yesterday. The words didn't register at first. They were just sounds, disconnected from meaning. My mind fumbled with them, trying to make them fit into the reality of the perfect suit. The chilled champagne, the $5,000 check. They couldn't. Yesterday, the word came out as a strangled whisper. My own voice sounded alien to me. But the wedding was planned for Saturday. At the Botanical Gardens, we talked about it last week. Why wouldn't you tell me? Her laugh was a tinkling, delicate sound that scraped against my nerve endings like nails on a chalkboard. It was the lightest, cruelest sound I had ever heard. Oh, it was a last-minute thing, she said, her tone dripping with a casual condescension that was more brutal than any shout. We decided we just wanted a small, intimate affaire. You know, we only invited special people. Special people. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. The golden light in the room turned harsh and white, bleaching all the color from the world. The phone in my hand suddenly felt like a block of lead. In the mirror, my reflection distorted. The proud father in the fine suit was gone, replaced by a caricature, a pathetic, foolish old man dressed in a costume for a party he was never invited to. The room was spinning. I could hear Ethan's voice, a faint, cowardly protest in the background. Jess, don't, and then a sharp, final click. She had hung up. I stood there, frozen, the dial tone buzzing softly against my ear. The only other sound was the low, electric hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, a sound that suddenly seemed monstrously loud, the sound of a completely empty house. My own breathing was ragged, a painful rasping in my chest. Slowly, so slowly, I lowered the phone from my ear. My hand was trembling, not with age, but with a shock so profound it was seismic. I took a stumbling step back and my eyes scanned the room. My sanctuary. Now, a museum of my own idiocy. The freshly cleaned carpets, the gleaming windows, the silver-framed photo of the boy I had given everything to. I walked like a zombie into my office and stared at the white envelope on the desk. For Ethan and Jessica, a gift for special people. The weight in my chest wasn't just grief. It was humiliation. A deep, burning shame. But as the minutes stretched into an hour, and the afternoon light outside began to fade into the bruised purple of twilight, something else began to bubble up from the depths of my gut. It was a feeling I had suppressed for years. A feeling I had mistaken for stress or indigestion. It was a cold, hard, clarifying anger. It started as a flicker, and then it grew, burning away the sorrow, cauterizing the wound. An entire week passed in that cold, simmering silence. I didn't touch the suit. I didn't touch the envelope. I just sat in the quiet house, replaying that one sentence over and over in my head. We only invited special people. With each repetition, the pain lessened, and the ice in my veins thickened. Then, late one afternoon, as I was staring blankly at the television, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. The sharp, vibrating sound rattled against the wood, a violent intrusion into my grim peace. I glanced at the screen, my heart giving a single, hard thud. The name flashing in bright white letters was Jessica. I watched it ring. Once. Twice. A third time. Part of me, the old me, wanted to ignore it. But that man was gone. He had died last week, standing in front of a mirror in a navy blue suit. I took a deep, deliberate breath, feeling the cold resolve settle in my chest. I picked up the phone. This time, my voice was perfectly, unnaturally steady. Hello, Jessica. There was a noise on the other end of the line. It wasn't a word, just a sharp, involuntary intake of breath, like a gasp that got caught in the throat. I could picture her perfectly, standing in the sleek, minimalist kitchen I had paid for, her knuckles white as she gripped her $1,000 phone. The arrogant confidence she had worn like a designer coat just 1 week ago was gone, stripped away to reveal the raw, sputtering panic underneath. What did you just say? Her voice was a thin, reedy thing, laced with an incredulity so profound it was almost comical. I let the silence stretch. A deliberate. Calculated pause. I looked out the living room window at the old oak tree in my front yard, its leaves just beginning to turn the color of rust. It had stood there for 100 years, weathered every storm, and remained unmoved. In that moment, I felt a kinship with it. I believe my words were quite clear. Jessica, I said, my tone even and dispassionate, as if discussing the weather. But since you seem to be having trouble, I'll repeat myself. My financial assistance, as I have just been made painfully aware, is a privilege reserved exclusively for special people. And according to you, I am not one of them. Therefore, the bank of Dad is closed. You can't do this, she shrieked, the carefully constructed facade of her sophistication shattering into a million pieces. The raw, grasping entitlement was now on full display. Murray, the landlord gave us an eviction notice. An actual, legal notice. We have 3 days to pay or we're out on the street. Ethan will lose his job, we'll be homeless. The litany of consequences was designed to trigger my guilt, to activate the paternal programming that had run my life for over 30 years. A week ago, it would have worked instantly. I would have been a mess of apologies and frantic promises to wire the money immediately. But the man she was talking to was a stranger to me now. He was a man forged in the fires of a profound betrayal, and his heart was made of something much harder than flesh and blood. That sounds like a very serious problem, I said, my voice betraying no emotion at all. I trust that 2 resourceful adults like yourselves will be able to figure out a solution. I could hear her sputtering, a string of incoherent, furieuses noises. I could hear Ethan in the background, his voice a pathetic whine. Jess, give me the phone. Let me talk to him. But I had no interest in talking to him. His silence a week ago had been his answer. It was a testament to his cowardice, his complete and utter failure as a son. You will regret this. You old fool. Jessica finally spat, her voice thick with venom. No, Jessica, I said softly, but with the weight of absolute certainty. I'm only regretting that I didn't do this 3 years ago. And with that, I ended the call. I didn't slam the phone down. I pressed the red icon on the screen with a steady thumb and placed the device back on the coffee table. The silence that filled the room this time was different. It wasn't the silence of loneliness. It was the silence of sovereignty. It was the sound of my own life. Finally, being my own. I knew this wasn't the end. People like them didn't just walk away. Their sense of entitlement was a living, breathing thing. And when starved, it would become vicious. I stood up, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The grief and confusion had receded, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. I was no longer a victim in my own home. I was the master of it. And it was time to fortify the walls. That very afternoon, I went online and found a 24-hour locksmith. A gruff, bearded man named Gus arrived within the hour. He didn't say much, just grunted and got to work. I stood by and watched as he expertly dismantled every lock on every door, the tumblers and pins falling into his calloused palm. He replaced them with heavy-duty, high-security deadbolts. The final sound of the new front door lock clicking into place was a solid, satisfying thunk. It was the sound of a door closing on the past. Next, I opened my laptop and spent 2 hours researching home security systems. I didn't want some flimsy, battery-operated gadget. I wanted something serious. I settled on a state-of-the-art system with high-definition cameras covering every angle of my property, complete with motion sensors, night vision, and a cloud-based storage system that was impossible to tamper with. It arrived in a box 2 days later. I spent an entire Saturday on a small stepladder, methodically installing the cameras myself, drilling holes and running wires with a precision that surprised me. It was an act of reclamation, of taking back control, one screw at a time. A few days of quiet followed, a tense, watchful quiet. I found myself checking the live feed on my phone periodically, my heart beating a little faster each time. Then, one evening, as I was sitting down to a simple dinner of soup and bread, my phone buzzed with a notification. Motion detected at front porch. My soup forgotten. I tapped the notification. The screen filled with the ghostly, black and white image from the night vision camera. And there they were, my son and his wife, lurking on my front porch like common thieves in the night. I watched, my blood turning to ice, as Ethan fumbled with his old key, trying to jam it into the lock I had just replaced. He pushed. He jiggled it, his frustration evident even in the grainy footage. Jessica stood behind him, her arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently. I saw her hiss something at him, and he flinched. He tried the key one more time before giving up, slumping against the doorframe in defeat. They began to argue, their faces contorted in ugly masks of anger and desperation. They paced the porch, peering into the windows, their hands cupped against the glass. For a moment, Jessica's face was perfectly framed in the camera's view. Her eyes, wide and searching in the darkness, suddenly darted upwards, directly at the small, dark lens of the camera I had installed above the door. I saw the flash of recognition, of pure, unadulterated shock, before she grabbed Ethan's arm and dragged him away into the darkness. I saved the recording. I felt no shock, no sadness, just a grim, validating certainty. I had been right. The next attack came not in the night, but through the mail. It arrived in a thick, cream-colored envelope with the letterhead of a downtown law firm. My hands were steady as I slid it open. The language inside was cold, clinical, and brutal. It was a formal notice that my son, Ethan Miller, was petitioning the court for emergency conservatorship. It was filled with legal jargon, but the message was clear. They were claiming I had suffered a severe cognitive decline. They alleged I was no longer capable of managing my own personal or financial affairs. They painted a picture of a confused, vindictive old man, a danger to himself, whose life savings needed to be protected. By them, of course. It was a declaration of war. They weren't just after my money anymore. They were trying to steal my mind, my identity, my very personhood. A week later, there was a knock on my new fortified door. It was a woman from Adult Protective Services. She was younger than I expected, with tired eyes and a weary but kind smile. Her name was Brenda. I had been expecting her. Instead of being defensive, I invited her in. I offered her a cup of coffee, which she gratefully accepted. We sat at my kitchen table, and I calmly and methodically told her everything. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just stated the facts, from the wedding to the phone calls to the eviction notice. Then, I slid a neatly organized folder across the table. It contained printed copies of my bank statements from the last 3 years, with every $4, $500 rent payment, and every exorbitant furniture bill highlighted in yellow. She spent a long time looking through it, her expression growing more and more serious. When she was done, she looked up at me, and the professional weariness in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet sympathy. "Mr. Miller," she said softly, "thank you for being so transparent." After she left, I knew what I had to do. Being right wasn't enough. Having the evidence wasn't enough. They had brought lawyers and the law into this. I was an old man, a retired accountant. I was out of my depth, and I was in the fight of my life. I spent the rest of the day online, not looking for the flashy, smiling lawyers on billboards, but for a specialist. You search it for terms like Eleanor, financial abuse, litigation, and conservatorship defense. One name kept coming up, Catherine Davis. Her website was no nonsense. Her biography formidable. They called her the Shark. I called her office and made an appointment for the next day. Her office was in a sleek, modern building downtown. It wasn't opulent, but it radiated an aura of quiet, expensive competence. Miss Davis herself was a woman in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an impeccably tailored gray suit. She didn't waste time with small talk. She sat across a large glass desk from me, her hands folded, and said simply, "Mr. Miller, please, tell me what's happened." And so I did. For the third time, I recounted the entire sordid tale. She listened without interruption, her gaze never leaving my face. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of professional neutrality. When I finished, I placed the same folder I had shown the APS worker on her desk. Finally, I pulled a small, silver USB drive from my pocket and pushed it towards her. "And this," I said, my voice low, "is the footage from my security camera from 3 nights ago." She inserted the drive into her laptop without a word. She watched the silent, black and white movie of my son and his wife trying to break into my home. She watched it once. And then, to my surprise, she watched it a second time. Her eyes narrowed in concentration. When it finished, she closed the laptop and slowly folded her hands again. She was silent for a long moment, and then she looked directly at me. The neutrality was gone. Her eyes were like chips of steel. "Mr. Miller," she said, her voice calm, but carrying an undercurrent of controlled fury. "They didn't just insult you. They committed a crime, and now they've started a war they have absolutely no chance of winning." A profound sense of relief washed over me. So potent, it almost made me dizzy. For weeks, I had been an island, a solitary figure, weathering a hurricane of betrayal and accusation alone. In that sterile, quiet office, hearing those words from Miss Davis, a war they have absolutely no chance of winning, I suddenly wasn't alone anymore. I had an ally. I had a general. The weight on my shoulders, the one I hadn't even realized I was carrying, lifted, leaving me feeling strangely light. "Their entire case," she began, her voice crisp and methodical as she leaned forward, steepling her fingers on the glass desk, "is built on a single, flimsy premise that you are mentally incompetent. They need the court to believe you are a confused old man, incapable of making rational decisions. Everything hangs on that. Their lawyer will try to paint your generosity as foolishness, your hurt as irrational anger, and your self-preservation as paranoia." She paused, letting the weight of the strategy settle in the room. "So, we are not going to run from it. We are not going to deny their request for a psychological evaluation. We are going to embrace it. We are going to turn their primary weapon into the very instrument of their own destruction." And so, the following week, I found myself not in a cold, clinical hospital room, but in the warm, book-lined office of a man named Dr. Alistair Finch. Miss Davis had been insistent. We would not use a court-appointed evaluator, nor one of their choosing. Dr. Finch was one of the most respected forensic psychologists in the state, a man whose expert testimony was considered unassailable. His office felt less like a doctor's office and more like a university professor's study, with worn leather armchairs and the faint, pleasant scent of old paper and pipe tobacco. Dr. Finch himself was a calm, thoughtful man with kind eyes and a quiet demeanor that immediately put me at ease. For 3 hours, he didn't just test me, he talked to me. He asked me about my life, about Eleanor, about my career as an accountant. He guided me through memory exercises, logic puzzles, and complex reasoning problems that felt more like engaging games than a test. Then, he asked me to tell him what had happened with my son. And I did. I told him everything. Starting with the pride I felt looking at that navy blue suit in the mirror. I spoke of the years of financial support, not with self-pity, but as a statement of fact. I described the phone call, and I repeated Jessica's words. "Only special people," my voice cracking just once on that single, sharp syllable. I told him about the eviction demand, the new locks, and the ghostly image of them on my porch in the dead of night. I told him about the legal letter that sought to erase my very identity. Through it all, he just listened, nodding occasionally, his gaze never wavering. When I was finished, a heavy silence filled the comfortable room. "Mr. Miller," he finally said, his voice gentle but firm. "It's clear to me you have been through a significant emotional trauma. What is also abundantly clear is that your cognitive faculties are perfectly, unequivocally intact." The weeks leading up to the court date were a blur of methodical preparation. I spent hours in Miss Davis's office, which began to feel like a war room. We sat at a large conference table, buried in mountains of paper, bank statements, credit card bills, receipts for furniture, wire transfer confirmations. With meticulous care, she assembled what I started to think of as the binder. It was a thick, black, three-ring binder, and every page was a testament to my generosity and their greed. Each section was neatly tabbed monthly rent payments, utilities, student loan payments, groceries and household, furniture, electronics. The final page was a single spreadsheet, a summary of 3 years of my life, with a final, staggering number at the bottom in bold. Red ink, $146. Babe. On the morning of the hearing, I put on a different suit, not the navy blue one. I couldn't bring myself to touch it. It hung in my closet like a ghost. Instead, I chose a simple, conservative charcoal gray suit. My hands were trembling slightly as I knotted my tie. I wasn't a man accustomed to battle. I was an accountant, a man of numbers and quiet certainties. But as I looked at my reflection in the mirror, I saw the quiet resolve in my own eyes. I was ready. The courtroom was an intimidating chamber of dark wood and high ceilings. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and a kind of institutional anxiety. I took my place beside Miss Davis at the defendant's table. Across the aisle, I saw them, Ethan and Jessica. They were dressed in drab, somber colors, trying their best to look like worried, dutiful children. Jessica gave me a fleeting look, a mixture of anger and a strange sort of pity, as if I were a sick animal she was reluctant to put down. Ethan wouldn't look at me at all. He just stared at his hands. The picture of a tormented son. Their lawyer, a slick, overconfident man named Mr. Davies, gave us a confident little smirk. He went first. His opening statement was a masterpiece of condescending fiction. He painted a picture of a loving family in crisis. He spoke of their beloved father, Murray, and his increasing and unfortunate confusion following the death of his wife. He suggested that my sudden decision to cut them off was not a rational act, but a symptom of a paranoid, age-related, cognitive decline. He made it sound as if this legal action was a painful but necessary step to protect me from myself. He was so convincing. For a moment, even I almost believed him. Then it was Miss Davis's turn. She rose slowly, her movements deliberate and calm. She approached the judge's bench not with theatricality, but with the quiet authority of a surgeon. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the thick air of the courtroom. "Mr. Davies has painted a compelling picture of a family in crisis. The only problem is, it's the wrong picture. This is not a story about a father's tragic decline. This is a story about a father's exploitation, and we have the receipts." That was the signal. The projector in the courtroom hummed to life, and there, on a large screen, for the entire room to see, was the final spreadsheet from the binder. The number $146, 800 glowed like a wound. Miss Davis picked up a laser pointer, and for the next 20 minutes, she walked the judge through 3 years of my life. "Your Honor," she said, her voice like ice, "here we see 36 consecutive rental payments of $4. Woo-bay. Here are the utility bills. Here is the bill for a sectional sofa that cost more than my first car. I ask you, does this look like the erratic behavior of a mentally incompetent man, Or does this look like the methodical, sustained financial support of a father who was being systematically drained of his life savings? Mr. Davies was on his feet, objecting, but the judge, an older, stern-looking woman with sharp eyes, waved him down, her gaze fixed on the screen. I risked a glance at Ethan and Jessica. The color had drained from their faces. They looked like children who had been caught with their hands deep in the cookie jar. And now, Your Honor, Miss Davis said, her voice dropping slightly, creating a palpable sense of anticipation in the room. I would like to present Exhibit B. She nodded to the clerk, who dimmed the courtroom lights. Mr. Davies shot to his feet again. Objection. Relevance. It is relevant to establishing a pattern of manipulative and desperate behavior. Your Honor. Miss. Davis countered smoothly. I'll allow it, the judge said. Leaning forward, the screen flickered, and then the grainy, black and white footage from my front porch filled the courtroom. The silence was absolute. Everyone watched the silent, grim movie of my son and his wife trying to force their way into my home. The footage was clear enough to see the frustration on their faces, the furtive glances over their shoulders, the panic in Jessica's eyes when she finally spotted the camera. It was undeniable. It was damning. I could feel their humiliation like a physical heat radiating across the aisle. When the lights came up, the atmosphere in the room had changed. The slick confidence had vanished from Mr. Davies' face. The judge was looking at Ethan and Jessica with an expression of open contempt. Miss Davis wasn't finished. She called her final witness, Dr. Clusin, Alistair Finch, for 30 minutes. The respected psychologist calmly and professionally dismantled their entire case. He presented the results of my evaluation, stating for the court that my cognitive faculties were not only intact, but in the superior range for a man of my age. He concluded his testimony with a statement that seemed to suck all the remaining air out of the room. It is my professional opinion, he said, looking directly at the judge, that Mr. Miller displays remarkable emotional and mental resilience. Furthermore, the pattern of events he has described is not indicative of his own instability, but is clinically consistent with a prolonged period of sustained financial and emotional manipulation by the petitioners. It was the final nail in their coffin. But Miss Davis wanted to seal it shut. I have one final witness. Your Honor, she said. I call Jessica Miller to the stand. A ripple of shock went through the courtroom. Jessica looked terrified. But under a harsh glare from the judge, she had no choice. She walked to the witness stand, her steps unsteady, and was sworn in. Miss Davis approached her slowly. Her voice was deceptively soft. Miss Miller, you have just heard expert testimony that your father-in-law is of sound mind. You have seen evidence that he has given you and your husband over $146. 0 inches the last 3 years. Is that correct? Yes. But, Jessica stammered, a simple yes or no will suffice. Miss Miller. Miss Davis said, her voice hardening slightly. Did this man, who you claim is incompetent, pay your rent, your bills, and furnish your home? Yes, Jessica whispered, her voice barely audible. Miss Davis took a step closer. She let the silence hang in the air for a long moment before she delivered the final blow. Miss Miller, she said, her voice now ringing with cold, clear precision. After receiving over $146, 000, from this man you have brought to court today, could you please tell the judge, in your own words, why exactly he wasn't special enough to be invited to your wedding? The color drained completely from Jessica's face. She looked like she had been slapped. Her mouth opened, then closed. No sound came out. Her eyes darted wildly from Miss Davis to the judge, to her husband, who was now staring at the floor as if he wished it would swallow him whole. She was trapped, utterly and completely trapped by her own words, her own greed. The entire courtroom was silent, waiting for an answer that would never come. The judge stared down at the speechless woman on the witness stand, her expression a mask of pure indignation. She picked up her gavel, and the sound it made as it struck the wood was like a gunshot in the silent room. "This court," she announced, her voice booming with authority, "will recess to consider its verdict." The silence in the courtroom was a physical entity. It was thick, heavy, and suffocating. Every person in that room, the clerk, the bailiff, the handful of spectators, was frozen, their eyes locked on the pathetic, crumbling figure of my daughter-in-law on the witness stand. The judge's words, "This court will recess," hung in the air, the echo of the gavel still ringing in my ears. The recess felt like an eternity suspended between two heartbeats. I didn't look at Ethan or Jessica. I couldn't. I just stared at the polished wood grain of the table in front of me, focusing on the swirling patterns, trying to regulate my own breathing, which felt shallow and ragged. Miss Davis placed a calm, steadying hand on my forearm. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. What felt like a lifetime but was likely only 15 minutes later, the door to the judge's chambers opened. A wave of tension rippled through the room as we all rose to our feet. The judge swept in, her face an unreadable mask of judicial authority, and took her seat. She looked out over the courtroom, her gaze sharp and missing nothing. It lingered for a moment on Jessica, who looked physically ill, then on Ethan, who seemed to have shrunk into himself. Finally, her eyes met mine. For a fraction of a second, I saw something in them beyond legal impartiality. It was a flicker of profound human understanding. "Please be seated," she said, her voice commanding the room back into silence. She opened the folder in front of her. Though she never looked down at it, she knew exactly what she was going to say. "I have reviewed the petition for conservatorship filed by Mr. Ethan Miller and Miss Jessica Miller, and I have considered the testimony and evidence presented in this courtroom today." She paused, and I felt my entire body tense, my knuckles white where I gripped the edge of the table. "In my 20 years on this bench," she continued, her voice low and laced with a cold fury that was more terrifying than any shout, "I have rarely witnessed such a grotesque and shameless abuse of the legal process. This petition is not an act of familial concern. It is a transparent and despicable attempt at financial theft, cloaked in the thinnest veneer of false piety." A collective gasp went through the room. Jessica flinched as if she'd been physically struck. The judge wasn't finished. She looked directly at my son and his wife. "You came into this court, and you painted a picture of a confused, incompetent man. But the evidence has shown us a man of remarkable clarity and fortitude. The only confusion present in this case is your own, a profound confusion of filial duty with financial opportunity. You have mistaken a father's love for a bank account, and a father's generosity for a sign of weakness. You enjoyed the fruits of his life's labor, living a lifestyle you did not earn. And when the source of that funding was rightfully withdrawn, you sought not to stand on your own 2 feet, but to destroy the very man who had lifted you up. It is an appalling and, frankly, disgusting display of ingratitude. Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling their lies, their character, their very sense of self. I felt a strange, detached, calm wash over me. It wasn't triumph, I felt, but a deep, somber sense of validation. Therefore, the judge declared, her voice ringing with finality, the petition for conservatorship over the person and estate of Mr. Murray Miller is hereby denied. With extreme prejudice, she looked at Miss Davis, and I would strongly advise counsel for Mr. Miller to consider filing for a permanent restraining order against the petitioners. This court would be highly inclined to grant it. She struck the gavel one last time. A sharp, definitive crack that echoed the breaking of chains I hadn't even known were wrapped around me. This court is adjourned. It was over. For a moment, no one moved. Then, a choked, agonizing sob broke the silence. It was Ethan. He had completely crumbled, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with racking, pathetic cries. Jessica was frozen, her face a mask of chalk-white disbelief. Her reality, the one where she was always the smartest person in the room, where she always got what she wanted, had just been publicly and brutally shattered. Her lawyer, Mr. Davies, touched her arm, trying to whisper something to her, but she flinched away from him as if his touch were poison. They were utterly, publicly, and humiliatingly defeated. Miss Davis squeezed my forearm. You did it. Mr. Miller, she whispered. I could only nod, a lump forming in my throat. I stood up on legs that felt unsteady and followed her out of the courtroom, not once looking back. The moment I stepped out of the courthouse doors and into the bright afternoon sun, it felt as if I was breathing for the first time in my life. The air, thick with city exhaust, smelled sweet and clean. The cacophony of traffic sounded like a symphony. The sunlight on my face felt like a benediction. I had walked into that building a defendant, a man forced to prove his own sanity. I was walking out a free man. The physical weight of the ordeal lifted from my shoulders so suddenly that I felt almost light-headed. I shook Miss Davis's hand, a firm, grateful grip, and for the first time, in what felt like an eternity, a genuine smile touched my lips. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of decisive action. The first thing I did was call a real estate agent. 2 days later, a man hammered a for sale sign into the lush green lawn of the home where I had raised my son, the home where Eleanor and I had built a life. Watching him from the window, I felt not a pang of sadness, but a profound sense of liberation. That house was no longer a home. It was a museum of a life that was over, filled with ghosts of a love that had been betrayed. The house sold in less than a month. I took only the essentials: my books, my photographs of Eleanor, my clothes, and a few cherished pieces of furniture. The rest I had an estate sale company sell it all. The sectional sofa, the dining table, the king-size bed that had once been in their apartment, all of it was sold to strangers for pennies on the dollar. I moved into a sleek, modern penthouse apartment on the 30th floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the entire, glittering expanse of the city. It was the kind of place I never would have imagined for myself, but it was perfect. It was a space with no memories, no history. It was a blank canvas, and I began to paint. I signed up for an art class, something I had secretly wanted to do for 50 years. My first attempts were clumsy, amateurish, but I found a joy in the simple act of creation, of mixing colors, of making something new. One afternoon, while unpacking the last of my boxes, I came across the navy blue suit. I took it out of the garment bag. It was still perfect, a symbol of a father's hopes. I looked at it for a long time, then folded it neatly and placed it in a box for charity. Its purpose in my life was over. One evening, I sat at the new, minimalist desk that looked out over the city lights. I opened my laptop and navigated to the website for the National Center for Elder Justice. I thought about the humiliation of the past few months. I thought about how close I had come to losing everything, and I knew my victory couldn't just be for me. I typed a number into the donation field, a significant number, nearly a third of what was left of my retirement, and I clicked the button. A quiet sense of peace settled over me. The money, which had been the source of so much pain and been used as a weapon against me, was now a shield for someone else. 3 months passed. I didn't hear from Ethan or Jessica, and I made no attempt to contact them. The restraining order was in place. One day, I received a call from a distant cousin, a woman who was a notorious gossip but meant well. She told me she had heard through the family grapevine about their situation. They had been evicted. As expected, they were living in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment in a rough part of town. Jessica was working 2 jobs, one as a waitress and another in retail, her polished nails now chipped and worn. Ethan was working nights in a warehouse, loading trucks. They were struggling, fighting constantly. They were, for the first time in their lives, entirely on their own. I felt no joy in hearing this, no sense of vengeance. I just felt a quiet, detached finality. The world had finally taught them the lesson that my love and my money never could. Tonight, I am standing on my balcony. The sun has just set, leaving streaks of fiery orange and deep purple across the horizon. The city below is a galaxy of twinkling lights. I hold a glass of good red wine in my hand, and the cool evening breeze feels wonderful against my skin. At 69 years old, I have learned that true love cannot be bought, and respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned. I have learned that boundaries are not walls to keep others out, but fences to protect the sacred ground of your own soul. And I have learned that freedom is not something that is given to you. It is something you must claim for yourself. My name is Murray, and for the first time in a very, very long time, I am finally a special person to myself.